Thank you, Padmanabhan Garu, for your invitation, and Jayama Garu, Ramji Garu, Ramkumar, and friends. I want to focus my talk today on the idea of good teaching and relate this to the question of the 21st century and the new education policy. I hope that I'm audible, and if you have trouble with the quality of the audio, please alert me by interrupting so that I can adjust the technology around me. Yeah.
You're perfectly audible now.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. I want to begin by recollecting some good teachers whom I have had the benefit of having and observing close to me. And I want to use this and connect it with some idea of what we are learning from theory about good teaching and share with you some research that my students have been doing on this idea of good teaching. And I'm hoping, and I want to eventually connect this with the 21st century and the new NEP. That's what I want to do in this talk. Firstly, I want to recall my mathematics teacher from undergraduation, my BSc, Mrs. Shakuntala. She was an unassuming, quiet personality, but with an amazing capacity to teach. She would pose problems to us to think about together in class and allow us to talk through and figure out the argument and the proof. She encouraged us to think and come up with our own approaches, even if we were making mistakes. And she really supported us to think of every problem that she posed to us as an invitation to inquire and investigate. Her main input in all this was encouragement, to say that, yeah, start with whatever you know, don't hesitate, and being patient. Even though obviously she knew the answers or the way the proof had to go or could understand why a certain direction of thinking may not be productive, she just held back. She was never tempted to interrupt and complete what we had embarked upon. The fact that she was interested in our thinking and in our ideas gave us the confidence to move forward and think things through. And that's really what we felt from her as a teacher, that she's interested in what we are thinking and what we are trying out. And of course, I learned mathematics from her, but I also learned to enjoy the process of mathematical thinking. And I also realized and valued that she was trusting her students' intuition and efforts. Later on, I really understood the importance of that. As a teacher, we need to be able to trust our students and trust that they are also there to learn and they are making efforts. I really learned that from Mrs. Shakuntala. The second teacher I want to talk about is my son's swimming coach, Sharat sir. Everybody in the swimming class is terrified of Sharat sir. He really shouts at children and he barks at them. He's not at all, you feel that he's really like scolding them, sometimes quite harshly, but somehow the children are not frightened by this. They don't want to stop going to swimming. In fact, they want to go swimming. They're willing to wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning and go and for this interaction with Sharat sir. And I've realized that what they really love about the experience is that he's holding them up to expectations and he's making each one of them feel important in his eyes. And that they feel that they have to live up to Sharat sir. So he's holding these expectations. He's not making them feel that you're not worth it. Some of the children are actually not like sports champion material. Even my own son, he's a good swimmer, but he's not like winning medals and all that. But that doesn't seem to matter. He's holding them up to their need to put in effort, to strive, to try out difficult things. And I've noticed how Sharat knows the psychology of every child and he knows how to push them and set expectations from them. He doesn't treat all children as same. And when they respond differently to his suggestions, he understands where they're coming from. But he'll never allow a child to become lazy or slack off. And he has different plans for every child. He also approaches the sport with the idea that there are many things that fitness needs to achieve, many goals. It's not like everybody has to achieve the same goal through the experience. And that is my example of the second good teacher. The third teacher I want to recall is my teacher in my MPhil and PhD, Professor Krishna Kumar. I think many of you may have read his work. He's a remarkably wise, knowledgeable person with deep insight into education. And I and many of his students have benefited from this. I've seen him teach to his principles of equity and social justice. And I have learned to respect his creativity and efforts in teaching students from whether they are from English medium or Hindi medium with the same passion and dedication, giving every student the full benefit of his scholarship, never holding back, thinking that this student deserves it and that student doesn't deserve it. He's undoubtedly charismatic. But still, what really struck me about Krishna Kumar as a teacher is the amount of effort that he puts in for every class. He never goes to a class without preparation. And he spends hours preparing for every class. He thinks about the examples that he's going to select. He thinks about the questions that he should ask and the design of assignments. It's amazing. This professor who spends so much time writing spends equal time preparing for a class with a view of how is my class going to make learning happen for all the students. This again is a remarkable teacher, and I have learned deeply the importance of this kind of attention to detail and planning that the teacher always does. He's just recently retired, but I have never known Krishna Kumar to go to any class without preparation. Even though he is, even after 20 years of teaching, he has always stepped back before every class, thinking about what is it that I'm going to do? What do I need to achieve for my children, for my students? I think these three accounts draw our attention to some really very important things about what it means to be a teacher and what all of us as teachers, as a part of our own professional ethic, what we aspire to become and be like in our profession. And I'm sure as I describe these three teachers to you, each of them is a very different kind of teacher. They're not similar. Sharath is a very different type of teacher from Shakuntala Madam or Krishna Kumar, but all of them are able to achieve some standards of good teaching. I do want to just make this point that we don't all have to be good teachers in the same mold, but nevertheless, we can recognize good teaching. None of these three teachers were trying to be popular. That was not their aim at all. They didn't want children to run after them and hang out with them and all that, but each of them held themselves to high professional ethical standards, and that was they respected that every child is there to learn and every child has the right to learn, and that their basic job is to ensure that students learn, and they had this large vision of what learning means. So let's come to this core of what is this basis of good teaching, which we are learning from research. And as I will go on to speak, even my own research and my students' research on teachers is showing us. One is that this entire work of teaching, I'm sure all of you know it, it's based upon this relationship that we build with students. This relationship of communication is the basis of good teaching. Research tells us that this is the key character of good teachers. They see teaching as an act of communication with their students and built upon the relationship that they have with their students. And these are relationships not with the mass of children. These are relationships with every child, individual children. And every child feels that they are known by the teacher and that they enjoy the teacher's attention and affection. It's not about having fun with the teacher or, enjoyment. Yes, those are parts of it. But good teachers make us struggle. Good teachers make us feel that putting an effort, persevering at things is worth the trouble. It's not that, even if we don't have fun today and the fun gets postponed by months, a good teacher still makes us feel that it is worth it. And I think that's really what we need to recognize about teachers. They make us strive for things which are long term, not immediate. And that is what each of these teachers that I illustrated you enabled us to do. Not only were we growing and learning the subject, but we were developing qualities and characteristics that hold us for life in terms of how we will become as people and as human beings. And the learning project is a long term project. It's not a project to be achieved in 1 hour, 2 hours, 5 hours. It's really a project of years of work. Teaching is, of course, a part of everyday life. Even in our homes, it's a site of teaching and learning. Our parents are our first teachers. And being a teacher in a school is similar to what happens in home. Parents, like teachers, enable children to come to know things that they don't already know. But in the school and in the education system, the process of teaching and learning is a little different from what happens at home. It is not this organic learning that takes place in the home, but in learning that happens in the school is deliberate. In the home, the relationship is very central. And the process of teaching learning is an extension of this basic relationship of parents with their children. In the context of school, however, initially maybe the child's attention is towards the teacher, and the teacher enables learning to happen through the relationship. But soon, the teacher directs the child's attention away from the person of the teacher towards the object of learning. And with the student attends on the object of learning. I think some of those pictures which the Acharya initiative was sharing about constructivism illustrates that. You will recall that there was this photograph of a drawing of a table with an object on it, and both the teacher and the students are addressing and attending to that object. That's really what is happening in the space of the school. The teacher is not interested that the child should look at me, but with me the child should look at that leaf on that table, or that experiment that I have set up, or that object on the board, and we need to together work on it and achieve our learning objective. This is really what is very unique about the nature of the relationship between the teacher and the child. The teacher is not interested in merely securing an emotional bond with students, but she wants to, through this bond, achieve a learning objective which is out there. And the teacher's work is to enable the child to see this object the way she sees it. That's really what the facilitation is all about. And teachers rely on the relationship with their child to redirect attention towards what it is that they're trying to teach and what it is that they are trying to get children to learn. So I want us all to think about it. We are all in the business of teaching, we are all co professionals. And I hope that this depiction that I'm giving you, I call it the teaching triad. It is not a dyad, it's not the relationship between me and the child. It's a relationship between me and the child and the object that I'm trying to teach. So it's a triangular relationship. It's not a two-way relationship. This is really the central idea of teaching. And constructivism is basically a theory reminding us that that's what it's all about. Constructivism doesn't say leave the children alone with the objects of learning and they will make the learning happen on their own. No. Constructivism is saying, look, you have a role as a teacher, but it's not the job of the child to figure out what you have in your mind and absorb it. Rather, you with the child must attend to these objects of learning and enable learning to take place. It's a triadic relationship, not a dyadic relationship. With this idea, I want to now move to the part where I will speak to you about some research that my students have done, and also which I have learned through this handbook that was being referred to. I recently completed a review of research on good teaching in the South Asian context. So I want to pull out some insights from that work and share it with you. And I also want to share with you some insights that my students have gained about good teaching. Some of them have been researching good teachers who work in government school contexts. Their students are coming from rural areas or the other urban poor. And the review of literature that I have completed also looks at teachers who are teaching in ordinary schools, where children who come from homes with which are not excessively well resourced, but have resources. But parents may not have been educated very far, not beyond class 5. Sometimes the home is not even a peaceful place. I want to just highlight what good teachers are doing or trying to do. And specifically because of, uh, I'm speaking to a group of teachers and colleagues from Agastya Foundation, I want to focus a little bit on the science teachers and the quality of science teaching in particular. The first thing that we have noticed about science teachers is that most of them love the subject and they identify strongly with the subject matter of science. I think many of you are science teachers, and I hope that I am correct in this about all of you as well. That we study science, we opt to learn science, not only because it's high status, but we also love the ideas that science gives us. And we identify strongly with the subject matter of science. These teachers in our research that we did, and also the review of research that I have done, they have particularly appreciated the relevance of science to everyday life, the fact that science seeks explanations, that science has an application value, and that science is relevant to life and can improve life conditions. All these teachers feel very strongly that this is something very unique about science. And this is what makes science enjoyable and important. And they all feel that they must teach science so that children can grasp and learn these things. They feel that science is not just something which is meant for brilliant students, but they think that science has a relevance for everybody and that everybody must learn science. In particular, they see that their science, and especially the science that is taught in school, connects with everyday life and can be seen around the life, in our own everyday life. For example, um, one of the teachers who was working with concepts of boil a change of state reminded students that coconut oil which they apply on their head, actually based on the season the state of that oil changes. Sometimes it's solid and sometimes it's liquid, and she was able to connect, and she spent a lot of time enjoying the connections that she was able to make between ideas that are there in the science textbook and everyday experiences that children have. And these teachers encourage students to answer in their own words and from their own experience. This is, I think, really something very unique about science. And science teachers know that the reasoning of the child has to be trusted. And if you allow everyday life to come in, then children automatically will speak about things in their own language. They don't have to memorize and repeat answers that they learn from the textbook. They can explain the same concept in their own, from their own experience and in their own words. The second thing that was noticeable about teachers is that they felt that everybody should learn science and should be able to do science. And they also trusted that all children can develop the ability to reason and that all children observe life around them. So they really had the strong equity and inclusion dimension when they conducted their lessons. They felt that they in fact waited for children to come up with their own examples from their own immediate context. And these were teachers who knew about the lives of their own students that they were teaching. They were not imagining that these are children from some middle class city home. In the rural context, they drew examples from the rural area. And they were able to pick up examples from the mother's kitchen that the children must have observed, or just ordinary everyday experiences that children have. So this was something again which was very visible in science teachers, that they felt that everybody can and should learn science, and that it relates to everyday life, and it can be experienced by everybody. So there was a strong inclusive dimension that was also noticeable among these teachers. The third thing which is really striking, and it's really important, I think, as a theme for today, which is Teachers Day, is that all these teachers enjoyed and wanted to have professional autonomy. Research tells us that teachers' professional identities are really very, very important. And the identity of the teacher, all of us as teachers, we hold it. It's not separate from us like some professional identity separate from our personal identity. The professional and the personal identities of teachers are together. And teachers feel, in my research, I have found that teachers feel they should have professional autonomy, and that they work most effectively when they can exercise professional autonomy. I am just pausing to think a little bit about this idea of professional autonomy. This is not like some whimsical thing that I will do my own thing. It's actually judgment about what is desirable for children to learn, which teachers exercise based on their knowledge of the context of the subject matter and the child and the children they're teaching, and which is also backed by the professional judgment of the of professionals. So very often the teachers that we have studied, unfortunately in India we have very weak structures for professional groups and professional communication. Agastya Foundation is one of the few that is actually encouraging teachers to come together and work as a community. But even when this was absent, what we found is that teachers reach out to their colleagues, they reach out to their peers. Many of these teachers, because they were teaching in some district which is away from their home, was living in a working women's hostel and going to school and teaching. And they had colleagues in the working women's hostel with whom they would discuss ideas. So, contrary to the idea that teachers are isolated and that they don't have colleagues to speak to, these teachers were having professional discussions wherever they could find it, in around them with their own peers or their classmates. And this was really an important thing, that teachers enjoyed autonomy. In fact, teachers in private schools felt that yes, we don't have much teaching load, non-teaching load, we spend a lot of time in the classroom, but they felt frustrated because they felt that the private school managements don't value their professional autonomy. Private schools managements keep insisting, stick to the book, stick to the book, stick to the lesson plan. The government school teachers felt that they had more space for their professional autonomy to express itself, and that they really benefited from that kind of trust that the system generally has built about teachers' willingness and ability to act. And they trusted their own judgment. That was the really interesting thing. Teachers didn't hesitate to do what they thought was the right thing to do for children. And I think this is, again, a really important thing about the profession of teaching, that for us, our professional autonomy is really very important. And it is a very essential ingredient which enables us to be effective as teachers. I hope that these ideas that I have shared with you are ideas that you can connect with, especially given that most of you are science teachers. All of you enjoy the support of a foundation that encourages you to grow as professionals and work for the betterment of your students. And most importantly, all of you um, have opportunities to be autonomous as professionals and strength and work from your own strong sense of both professional identity as well as professional ethic. With these few remarks initially about some qualities of good teachers, then what theory is telling us about the nature of teachers' work, and what other research is telling us about what good teachers do, I want to move in this final section of my remarks to think a little bit about the new education policy. And what is it telling us? It's a policy which is, of course, it's in the 21st century, but we're already 20 years into the 21st century. 1/5 of the 21st century is already over. We're still very new in the millennium. But when I read the NEP and its vision for what education should achieve, I realize that a lot of the ideas of the NEP is furthering the agenda which we set up for ourselves with the National Curriculum Framework 2005 and the Right to Education. And that is the ensuring that every child experiences education with dignity and achieves the learning outcomes at the end of the day. The first thing which the NEP does, which the NCF 2005 also did, was to tell us that we still have not defeated the demon of rote learning. And our first battle is to defeat this. We have to ensure that we remove rote learning as the basis of our educational learning. And I know that as teachers, you and I don't teach. When we want children to learn, we encourage them to understand and to answer in their own words. But when they have to go and write examinations, the entire focus seems to shift to rote learning. And that's something that we have to defeat together. I think we are already defeating it in our classrooms, but we have to ensure that the examination system also changes so that we can ensure that our time is more meaningfully used. When we researched teachers' use of time, what we found is that teachers are spending about 1/3 of their time on understanding, and they're spending almost 2/3 of time on ensuring the children can answer the questions in the examination. Just think what a waste of time. If only we could spend 2/3 of our time on understanding and 1/3 of our time preparing children to answer questions of tests and examinations. So we'll have to kind of shift the emphasis of examinations so that we can bring more focus on understanding. The second thing that the the NEP is asking us to do, which it particularly identifies as relevant for the 21st century, is it's telling us that yes, subject learning is important, but along with that, we must aim for greater creativity, individuality, self confidence, and autonomy. And subject matter is not an end in itself. The subject learning that we do has to enable all these things to happen. And I think this is an important focus. We have to realize that as teachers, we not only teach the subjects to teach children, but we also enable them to develop these kinds of characters and develop this character and this personality and these dispositions. We're also working towards that. So we should be discussing more than just the content. We should really be thinking about this metacognition and these long-term aims that education is striving to reach. The third thing which the NEP is telling us to do, and I call this the Yashpal mantra, is to learn less, but learn it deeply. Don't try to cover so much content. Rather, focus on uncovering the content. This is, in fact, a very favorite play of words of Professor Yashpal. He said, we cover so much in our Indian teaching, but when are we uncovering it? That should be our job as school teachers. We should uncover the content and enable students to engage with content and concepts deeply. And Yashpal particularly felt this is very important because when we go deep into learning, we need time for it. We need to have opportunity to inquire, but that actually becomes the foundation which enables us to learn many more things. So a very unique role that teachers can do is to construct learning which is deep for students. In fact, during this pandemic time when we are struggling to make a connection with children and build relationships over the electronic medium, I feel that if we could construct more project based learning in which we pick up a few concepts, but we allow students to go deep into it, doing experiments and investigations on their own, we would probably make much better use of their time than trying to teach them on devices. And the final point that the NEP makes, which is something that all of you at Agastya understand so well, is the idea of experiential learning. This is really almost like the flip side of rote. If you're not going to learn to memorize, then how should you learn? Well, Dewey's answer is very simple. You must experience and then learn through experience. What I've learned, I mean, as a student of science, I have enjoyed experience, meddling around with the material world, mixing chemicals, rolling objects on slopes, observing leaves and nature. These are really very, very important for aspects of experiential learning. And in this, we not only undergo the experience, but we also reflect on the experience after we have undergone it. And that's really what makes experiential learning unique as a pedagogical tool. We have to undergo an experience and we have to deliberate on it after the experience. Only then it leaves a memory. I mean, it has to become memorable. We have to remember something. We have to connect it with things that we already know or derive new insights from that experience. So, the having of the experience and the conversation after the experience are all important for this thing called experiential learning. And that's really how we are going to defeat this demon of rote learning, and we're going to make use of deep learning in meaningful and productive ways. And I think this is really something important that we need to emphasize and build much greater capacity for experiential learning. In this, I would say that professional development is really important. One is that because of the nature of our own schooling, most of us have not had opportunities to mess around with equipment, do experiments. We were compelled to just learn from textbooks. At best, we had many examples which brought science to life for us. But I think having been through the kind of opportunities that Agastya is giving you, you realize how important it is to actually do things with your own hands. Make those observations with the instruments, observe carefully, notice things. These are really very essential, and we must never forget how important they are. In fact, as a part of the Connected Learning Initiative, when we were using ICT, our own mantra was we're going to use ICT, but we're going to enhance experiential learning through ICT. In other words, children may work with a computer, they may do things, watch a video, but at the end of the day, they must go out onto the field and do something. They must set up an ecosystem in their own classroom, make observations, and then come back to technology to make sense of it, deepen that understanding. But technology should not start substituting for this kind of experiential learning from the material world and the world around us. I think this point the NEP is making, and it's really very important. And I think as a community, uh, Agastya is very well positioned to translate this aim of of the NEP into reality in the lives of teachers and students. But more than just enabling the experiments to happen and the experiences to take place, I think that the professional development being provided must also help us develop the skills as teachers to do the things that need to happen after the experiment is over. How should we consolidate the learning and the observations that children have made? What kind of questions and tables and write ups should happen afterwards so that children convert their experience into some learning? I think that piece is also very important. And going forward through this new initiative, I'm certainly looking forward to a lot of that happening. It's not only the input of enabling the experience to happen and learning how to do it, but it's also the outcome where the experience has been undergone, and now we will really convert it into something which is memorable through the conversations that are taking place afterwards. So do remember, even as we talk about constructivism, the role of the teacher doesn't go away. If anything, the role of the teacher becomes much more subtle. Mostly, I think of my teacher Shakuntala when I think of constructivism. She never gave away the answers. She allowed us to have the experience, undergo the investigation, and just kept supporting us so that we didn't give up. And after all that experience was over, then we had the conversation about what we had learned and which directions of inquiry were useful and which directions of inquiry did not seem as promising and why. So that kind of conversation after the having of the experiment or the investigation is really very important. And even today, when I think of what we can do as teachers in the pandemic, I think we can be doing that. In Agastya, you're so well positioned. Set up interesting experiments for children. Let them do it, and then use the time that they have together in a Google Meet or something to talk about the consequences of that experiment. And I hope that that's really what many of you are planning to do over the next many months when we won't be able to get children back into school. Finally, I just want to pause and reflect a little bit about how are we going to realize these things that the NEP is reminding us as important? I mean, are these new things? Is the 21st century demanding new things that were not relevant in the 20th century? I would say no. By and large, human beings are the same. The issues and the difficulties are similar. Children's learning is pretty much, I mean, that's how learning happens. It needs that relationship, it needs that triadic work to happen. But the NEP does suggest some things that will additionally need to happen so that the system supports teachers to do these things. So, yes, teachers bring a lot into teaching, but teachers need the subsystem to support that to express itself. And it's going to be two kinds of support. One is support that the system gives because it sets up the institutions where teaching learning takes place. The other is what professional communities can do. And I count Agastya as a professional community. We are professionals. We are not running the schools, but we are there as professional educators to enable teachers. We are all part of the same professional community. And so while the system must ensure that the conditions for work are in place, that service contracts respect teachers, that the right kind of structures exist within the school. I think as a professional community, from Agastya's side, also there are very important things that we need to do. We need to ensure that teachers enjoy professional collegiality, through which ideas can be exchanged and experiences can be shared. And a lot of this learning of professional development is social in its nature, and learning in the company of other teachers is really very essential. The other is that professional learning communities like Agastya enable the conditions for professional motivation to stay alive. And I think that's a very important contribution that professional communities make. So, how the community grows, supports each other, how teachers feel included and that they are heard. I think these are very important directions. And I would be very interested to see how Agastya itself grows as a professional network. And I'm distinguishing this from the employment network of the institutions of school. Yes, we will, as a professional community, do many things with the government system and through the government system. But teachers can come to us regardless. And all our relationships are not dependent on the employer as the broker of the relationship. So I think if we can achieve that, then we will really push this whole conversation of the NEP of professional standards and so on in a new direction. And we will give a very real form to the professional lives of teachers. Teachers are not only uh, employees of schools, but they're also professionals in their own right. We are all professionals in our own right. And I certainly see Agastya as an organization of that kind. So thank you very much. Those were my remarks. I hope they are relevant for the occasion. And I hope that they speak to your experiences and your aspirations.